So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services. The translation used is from the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of Yahweh, and they are giving us then the understanding of the time of the end, as we then have learned the time of restoration and reduction. Restoration because came the 61st chapter of Yeshayahu, where he said, the returning of the holy cities, or the cities laid waste for many centuries, and then later the holy city in itself, Jerusalem, being rebuilt. Then time of reduction because the Messiah then himself, 24th chapter of Yeshayahu, he explains then the reduction of time as then if Yahweh would not reduce the time, then the selected would not survive. Meant the set apart would have to be in the holy cities prior of the vengeance, because the Torah has to be 100% satisfied in order for the vengeance to come. So then, any person thinking otherwise, or never would let this Torah be satisfied in order to maintain the status quo, then they are wrong. Because there is a time set, time limit, from the time then the Messiah is spent with the Samaritans, 50:31. From there, you count to 2,000, 2 days, then ends in 70:31. Per the Creator's calendar, we are in 70:12, giving us roughly 20 years. So then, there is a section of the teachings of the Messiah where it's not shown very clearly, and the area then later was shown to Shaul the Shaliach. When you read then the second Timothy, you begin to understand the relationship of Timothy and also Shaliach Shaul. Shaliach Shaul then was sent in a Gentile world, and then his objective was the delegation of responsibilities, and these responsibilities as his people then were receiving, then they were secluding. As if you then were providing a test in a company, where would you then give them a test and waiting for them until they would get through it? Of course, you would wait there until the test would finish, and then those who were selected would then placed aside. Would be similar what Shaliach Shaul did, as Ruach HaKodesh was then selecting the people and having them function, then they would be separated or secluded. There is a section of the teachings of the Messiah where Shaliach Shaul had shown in words. 2 Timothy, you find then Shaliach Shaul teaching Timothy. Timothy was very shy. He had a grandmother and his mother, they were very loyal to the Messiah, and he had prayers upon him from the elders. During the time the elders were then giving prayers, those were the times of the transition. They were not in a holy city, as per instructions. Later then, Shaliach Shaul became frustrated a bit with Timothy, and then he said very plainly, Timothy, then you have to act as a soldier. And there is a meaning behind this area. Shaliach Shaul received this understanding of a soldier throughout his lifetime as then a person sent by Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh said, separate Shaliach Shaul and Barnabas for the work of the kingdom to come. They were then sent into the Gentile world, not Gentiles. Gentile world. So then, Shaliach Shaul was explaining these areas, and then as Timothy failed over and over and over again, what went on? Timothy was then with Shaliach Shaul, and Shaliach Shaul, obviously, he had a special relationship with Timothy, thinking then Timothy would take his place. But Timothy did not. Timothy had another kind of a personality. Every time Timothy went out to teach, then the elders of those places, they began to be angry with him because he was young. The patrilineal problem. Then Shaliach Shaul said very plainly, in terms of his relationship with Timothy, then he said, and endure evils as a great soldier of the Messiah. What was he saying? And endure evils as a great soldier. Evils he was explaining as his people, not wanting to receive the word of the Messiah from Timothy. Those who were contrary of the second tabernacle services. Those were the evils explained. Because any kind of evil you read in a transitional time is related with the persistence of the set apart of not receiving the second tabernacle services teachings. Has nothing to do with the temple of prostitution or the kind, though there were areas where the set apart were involved. But the main bulk of the teaching of Shaliach Shaul is related with the Torah and his people not receiving the proper teaching, so then they would receive impartations where they would then function. When Shaliach Shaul said regarding a soldier, precisely he had an anointing from the Messiah. Contrary to what many people think, the Messiah was general. He was not this mamby-pamby type of a person speaking of the kingdom. He was the prophet. If you think Eliyahu was a prophet and he had a very important function, and then the other prophets, even with a military role, the Messiah had also. But there was a problem during the time of the Messiah. Every time the Messiah had the spirit of a general in order to further the work of the kingdom to come, then his people would think of the kingdom of Shlimon. It was a real problem, because when the anointing was around, the Messiah wanted them to have this anointing and go forward and form the holy cities as fast as they could, because he was then directing them to the end of line, completion of the second portion of the Torah. The people, they were having the wrong ideas. They were perceiving this anointing as receiving and fighting against Rome and then recuperating the kingdom of Shlimon to reestablish themselves as they used to be established during the kingdom of Shlimon. It was a real problem. It was so bad. When you read the 24th chapter of Mechichiahu, you'll find the Messiah speaking in the temple. And the way he spoke was as a general giving orders to an army. It was not this, and then Yahweh said, and then the ear of Yahweh and the favorable ear of Yahweh. He did not say this way. When the Messiah was speaking, he then was a general. Absolutely sure. Because when you read the prophets previously, some of those prophets were engaged in military action. The Messiah was the prophet. he had the best of every generation of the prophets in himself, plus the first anointing, plus also portions of vengeance. So when the Messiah was speaking in the temple, the people would be wild with anointing. But rather than understanding him as a servant of saving themselves from sin and forward them as fast as he could, so they would form holy cities, and then they would have an objective of finishing the second portion of the Torah Autumn Feast. The people then, they had the wrong idea. They wanted the anointing to make him king and fight against Rome and establish then the city as during the time of Shaliach, thus the kingdom. The Messiah, no, it is the kingdom to come government, and you have to form holy cities where he, the Messiah, was in the Holy of Holies. The people did not understand. When you read the 24th chapter of Matthew, you find that then he was in the temple reading. Here he was, came the anointing again upon the people, and they were excited. And then the people over there, the disciples, then the Shalishim had taken him up on a mountain to show him the city. And the Messiah was not interested. The Messiah wanted his people to understand that the second tabernacle services, and then the objective was for them to finish the second half of the Torah, preparing the people and the world for the autumn feast. So then, when you read 2 Timothy 2 and the 3rd verse, he said, and endure evils as a great soldier of the Messiah. No man on becoming a soldier entangles himself with the cares of this world, that he may please him who enlisted him. The Messiah as a factor of soldier and general. The Messiah spoke as a general during the time of the completion of the spring feast. However, it was not for the re-establishment of Jerusalem as the capital as during the time of Shaliach, but the kingdom to come government. So there is a brand new perspective of the Messiah and what he did, and his relationship with his people as absolutely a military person. However, he was sensitive enough to understand the limits until the holy cities were formed. Because the holy cities are the forts of each of a soldier doing the work for him. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up. We are going to develop an understanding from then 2 Timothy in relation with the Messiah as general. And understand why then Shaliach Shaul was a ram of the Torah. Why he was so strong. Why he taught so much. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.